Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Oh my gosh, this is a hard list. This is a hard list, but I'm attempting now to give you my top 10 all-time favorite video games of any category, period. But even that takes some qualification because I'm like, okay, these aren't necessarily games that I would say right now among all games, if you just put them next to each other without any qualification, these are the best. They're games that this is how I made this list. They're games that had the largest impact on me while I was playing them. Not the games necessarily that I would want to play more than any other games today. And for that reason, I'm going to present this list in the chronological order of when I first played them. So in a sense, I'm kind of chronicling for you these big crater impact games in the life of Peter Franson. Crater impact in a really good way. But first I have to mention, okay, 3 honorable mentions. I hate that this list is only 10. Usually, I've been doing top 5s lately, but I was like, I can't do 5. I'm gonna do 10. But still, I gotta mention Shadow Hearts, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and Far Cry 5. And there are many other games I would really like to mention as honorable mentions, but I'm not going to. Oh my gosh, I'm so sad. I was so sad not to have Shadow Hearts, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, and Far Cry 5 not on this list. Nevertheless, here we go, chronological order. The first game that was really a nuke in my life was the original Final Fantasy on NES. It was just revolutionary because I'm bad at any games that require action input and quick thinking and good hand-eye coordination and being good reflexible and all that stuff. I'm just bad at that. I've gotten maybe, I don't know, I don't think I've gotten a little bit. I think I've gotten maybe a little bit more patient, but I don't think I've gotten any better. But turn-based RPGs, my gosh, this genre, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't need the Game Genie to enjoy this. And Final Fantasy, just being able to have these different types of characters with different types of strengths and weaknesses, spells, of course, but also the ability, to fight with certain types of weapons and to explore this world. It was amazing. And it's the first game I remember crying because of. Not because of the emotional story, because of my immaturity as a 7th or an 8th grader. I remember you can only have so many spells learned of each level, and once you've filled those slots allotted to you each level by learning a spell, you can't unlearn them. And when I realized, because I think you could only have one save file on this, one save file on the whole cartridge, and I think once I realized that I had filled up all my most powerful level slots, and I could not get what was actually the most powerful spell in the game, which I think was called, like, I don't know, Nuke or something like that, I went to my room and cried. I think I might have even like sobbed. I was so sad, so distraught that I would never see what this spell looked like. Now, years later, I looked on YouTube, and it's like, oh yeah, it's just a different color little ball and squiggly. A ball and squiggly I've seen many times, but this is just a different color of that, But oh my gosh, I wanted to see the spell, because that was such a novelty compared to, say, Dragon Warrior, where you could see your characters come forward and use the weapon, which would change if they were equipping a different weapon. And casting a spell, which would change what it looked like if they were casting a different spell. I mean, this game, oh my gosh, it and Dragon Warrior opened up a world of new types of games for me to enjoy, and I, for over a decade or more, was pretty exclusively into JRPGs. So that's the first one on my list. The second one is Final Fantasy 3/6, which was the first game that I played on the Super Nintendo. And so in part, it was just like such a big upgrade, because I went straight from playing Final Fantasy and Dragon Warrior, maybe the other odd less than RPG on the NES, to getting a Super NES finally. And I skipped Final Fantasy 2/4 and just went straight to 3/6. And when it opens with that organ music and the rippling flames and stuff, and that really cinematic opening with the credits and stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, what have games become now that they're evoking elements of the cinema? And then with the writing was just so much more involved in terms of dialogue, character stories. You have this big ensemble cast. So in addition to the visuals being a major upgrade, there were just so many other elements about the writing, the systems, the skills that different people could learn, and the ability to equip all kinds of different skills on all kinds of different... You could customize your characters depending on what Esper summon monster you would equip them with, and they would go around and fight battles, and oh my gosh. And so many hidden characters, and it was the closest thing at that time to the open worlds that we have today. It felt so big, it felt so open, even though there was mostly a linear path you were going through because monsters would be too tough if you went off that path. But there were still places where you could branch and just optionally go and check stuff out that you could totally miss. There's hidden characters that are so easy to miss that you really need a strategy guide to figure out how to go and find them, you know. But man, I remember this one I had some really intense emotion associated with too. I mean, well, first off, the opera scene and just the romance of the characters that I was engaging with for the first time. I wasn't like particularly romantic when I guess maybe when I was in high school. So this would be around like 11th grade or so that I was first playing this. And but so I guess I was thinking a little bit romantically, mostly lustfully. But even so, it was moving, these romantic gestures between these characters and the opera scene. I remember, because I was just really involved in music theater. My college degree is as a vocal performance major, so I learned classical voice. And I remember just quietly, I never said this to anybody in school, but I remember quietly thinking to myself, man, I wonder if I could find the music for the opera scene and I could like use that in my recital or something. And I'm so glad that the internet was in its infancy and I couldn't find it at that time because I think I would have really embarrassed myself. But that's just how legit I found this game, you know. It was just, oh. And I remember when I finished it, I was still in high school when I finished it, and there was I was watching the closing credits and the whole cinematic that goes on for, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, whatever it is. And I got a call. My dad came in the room and said, there's the pastor so-and-so at the church would like to talk to you. He wanted to ask me like if I could sing at a funeral or something like that. And I didn't want to talk to him. I was like, because you couldn't pause it. I was like, Dad, I gotta, and he was like, you need to talk to this pastor right now. He was not going to have me just brushing off in his mind a pastor because of the end of this game. But I was like, oh my gosh, this was the culmination of this massive multi-stage transforming boss fight at the end. Oh, so I did go back and play it again because I had to take the phone call and it was a portable phone. So I was like, yeah. And I was like barely paying attention. I caught some of the details. I couldn't give attention to either one fully. So I firmed up the details with the pastor later and I played the ending again to give my full attention to it. Oh my gosh. So yeah, the second one on this list, Final Fantasy 3/6. After that, a number of years later, Final Fantasy 9. This is the last of the Final Fantasies on this list, but Final Fantasy 9. Because it returned to so many of the things that I loved aesthetically, in large part, about the early Final Fantasy games. You had the Steeple Hat Mage, and it was a little bit more, I don't know, I think it was nostalgic. You know, I think that played a big part. But what really made an impact that I didn't see coming was that the main character has dishwater blonde hair, which now my hair is a little bit more like a brown or a light brown, but I mean, in junior high, high school, and some in college, it was more of a dishwater blonde. And so I was like, okay, I'll name my main character Pater. And then there's like a princess that they're kidnapping at the beginning of the game. And she's got dark hair and fair skin. And I was like, oh, well, I had just started dating my future wife at the time. And I was like, okay, so I'll name her after Holly, my girlfriend. And I didn't know that this story was going to build up to this romance between these two characters. And the way that some of the cinematics played out that just caught me by surprise with the serious emotion that they and the weight that they gave to some of those moments near the end, where she was just distraught when she was reunited with him again, thought that they were going to die and or she would never see him again, and in the cinematic, she is crying and then beating on his chest. So it's like that complexity of emotion of she's so relieved, but she's tearful still because she was so worried. And then she's also kind of angry too for him being, the hero that he was and going off and getting himself in trouble and putting himself at risk. That complexity of emotion in that one moment there, it was stuff like that near the very end that brought me to tears. And that was the first time I think that I'd ever cried or welled up with tears, at least, because of the storytelling in a game. In addition, of course, to all the things that I had grown to love so much about Final Fantasy at that point. So Final Fantasy IX is the third game on my list. Number 4, the only PC game on this list, is Neverwinter Nights. Wow. I was not even a fan of the tabletop D&D RPG at the time, which this translates as best it can 3rd edition rules into a PC game. I had not played Baldur's Gate 1 or 2. I'd never played any game like this. In fact, that's why when I first played it, I was like, this seems kind of complicated. I don't know if I'm into this. And I also wasn't used to using mouse and keyboard. There was just some things that were standoffish for me. But eventually I came back to it when I realized, okay, it's not going to be like this simple Diablo type thing. It is more of a rules intensive deal, but let me play as just a fighter and just try that class nice and simple. And then also take advantage of some console commands that if I needed to, if things were getting too complicated, I didn't know how to leverage all the things available to me to get through a fight, I just level up. Just use the console commands, level up. And so I really was able to ease my way in to the depth of this experience, specifically because of what it was on PC. And then, of course, it was just the gift that kept on giving. Because as I got comfortable with Fighter, I was like, okay, let's mix in some multi-classing. Let's teach my fighter some thief skills. I want to unlock those chests. Let's teach him how to use magic items. And that was my gateway into realizing, oh, I just want to play as a magic user. And so I finally took on that. And oh my gosh, that would be enough with the base campaign, I think. But the mod support from the community, there were so many people that were just taking published adventure modules for this game, and I think just copying and pasting the dialogue where it would belong, the enemies with the stats as they should be, approximating, using maps and stuff to recreate stuff. So there was so much about like game development. Now, I mean, you can kind of like think, okay, well, how legal is that or whatever, and that's like a whole different topic. That really wasn't on my mind. And I didn't even know from one module to the next which ones were necessarily based on official things or not. But all these modules being available meant that there was so much content that was actually of really good quality that I put hundreds of hours into this. I had never put more than 100 hours into a game. Now, granted, this game doesn't log how many hours you spend. I mean, when you get the PS4 version, I think that does. Just the PS4 logs it. But the game itself doesn't log it with your save file that I've ever seen. So I just have to approximate how many nights, how many hours each night, for how long was I playing this game. I know I put hundreds of hours into this game with all of those modules, all the depth of them. My gosh. It introduced a new type of game to me, really, which is the real-time with pause style of fantasy game, which is why I love Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous. That's how I found and played a game like that, was because it all started here with Neverwinter Nights. Man, what a fantastic experience. Next on my list, a little while after being obsessed with that, I discovered a love for The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. This game, it took a little doing to really understand the potential of it. It was my first truly open world game. And so the first time I played through it, I just mainly played the main campaign. It felt overwhelming to consider all the other things that I could do. I was like, can I go out there? I'll probably get into trouble if I go out there. Because I was so used to, if you go too far off the beaten path in JRPGs, the monsters there are going to be too hard. They're going to push you back to the main path. And so I didn't realize that the game was balancing the combat so that I could pretty much go anywhere and probably be okay. It also had difficulty settings, so I could dial the difficulty way down. But it wasn't until after I finished the campaign that I realized it's a point later on. Oh, I think there is so much more that I could do in this game. And so in going back to it, that was when my mind just really started to be blown by all the systems going on, all the lives that these NPCs are just seemingly leading with or without me in the city, and the detail of those routines, and all the different ways that quests could seemingly be resolved. It just seemed so open-ended. This was the first time that I felt this sense of like immersion in a game, like being present in a world that I could look around me and see. The first person perspective certainly had a lot to do with that. Now, granted, everyone's faces looking like potatoes did not help the game, and hearing the same 7 or whatever voice actors over and over and over again definitely broke that immersion. But for me, I've learned since then, it's about what's going on in the systems of a game and what those systems are simulating or representing that really hooks me in to a game, far more than their story, which I usually don't care about game stories at all. It's about my story. That's what I started to realize with games like this. It's about my story that I create in my head as I am going through and interacting with this world, and the headcanon story that I have going on that they could never account for in the writer's room of a game studio. So, yeah, Oblivion was really the start of that. And of course, not long after that, The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. And if I put time into Oblivion, I don't know how much time I put into Skyrim. Hard to track because it's been on multiple consoles. But this game, it really brought the art style to the more... First, the faces just looked better. But also it had more of a D&D-ish vibe, a little bit more grit to it, a little less brightness. Oblivion is a brighter game, and a simpler aesthetic, and there's just a more of a ruggedness and a darkness and a little bit more bleakness to the aesthetics of Skyrim, and that is the absolute sweet spot for me. I love that pseudo-serious D&D classic visual aesthetic, and I really got that in Skyrim, and with all the systems of Oblivion and seemingly more, and oh my gosh. So, yeah, I want to talk more about Skyrim because it is, of the two, my preferred game, but I think all the revelations I had with Oblivion, they just carried over and made Skyrim really at times an unhealthy obsession for me. So, yeah, Skyrim, man, I'm sure that's on a lot of people's all-time favorite games lists. And it's no surprise to me. It's certainly made it on mine. Okay, so the next, what are we on? 7. The 7th game on this list is a weird one for most people. Elmanage Original. And specifically the version on PSP that I played on Vita. It looks much better on PC. It's a poorly translated game, honestly. It's not, there's not really many resources available for this game. If you want to learn about it, learn how it's played, get a walkthrough, you're going to have to use Google Translate probably for that. But it is a turn-based, grid-based, party-based, first-person, just the dungeons, ma'am, dungeon crawl. There's no walking around town and talking to townspeople and figuring out, how do I advance the story? How do I advance the main plot? I mean, there's some of that if you're getting into the off-the-beaten-path quests, but I mean, and I guess to finish the game, I did have to figure out how some quests were supposed to be completed, but mostly it was just about, okay, here's all the dungeons on the map, you can go to any of them, they're rated by difficulty, and so I was just like, I'm going to just start going through each dungeon, and I'm going to clear the fog of war, because as you move through that map, your map is kind of like auto-drawn for you, and I'm just going to like clear the fog of war on every level of every dungeon, from least difficulty to greatest, and then, I don't know, I'll call it a day, unless I really want to finish the main quest, which I eventually did, but I just found it so satisfying to just focus on that, the grinding, the exploring. You've got the classic D&D-ish classes and lots of races, and actually more classes than you would typically see in a game that's kind of adapting D&D type classes. I mean, and the visual style of the game, I mean, it's the animations are minimal, But the part of that works to its strength because although it's turn-based, it is not slow. It moves as fast as your mind moves in making choices. And so combat can be very fast and snappy instead of the ATB gauge you're waiting for it to fill up in some of those Final Fantasy games. Like, this is an easy fight and I'm bored out of my mind waiting for this gauge to fill up. No. When you know what you want to do, you select the commands and boom, 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 it fires it off. And when you want to take your time, because this boss or whatever is a little bit tougher, then you can think a little bit. And so you have perfect control over the pacing of combat, pretty much. And the visual aesthetic, games of this type that are based on wizardry have really made their way to the East, and in Asian countries they're much more popular in the last 10 years or so. And so usually they're going to be made there, and they're going to have an anime aesthetic to them. And usually that aesthetic has some whimsy and some cartooniness and some anime-ness that I am just not into. This game, its visuals have just a little bit of that now and then, but mostly it's clearly inspired by classic D&D visuals. And so, again, I'm just such a sucker for that visual vibe. And in addition to just focusing, by this time I'd realize I don't care about stories. I want to play out my story and feel like it's being simulated by the mechanics available in the game. It was totally scratching that itch for me in a way that I never realized I could get or wanted before. Not only that, but a lot of games of this type that are based on wizardry, they have a lot of dungeon puzzles. You got to go around flipping levers, and it can be really confusing to figure out how to get to the bottom of a dungeon sometimes. That's very minimal in this game compared to others of its type that have a lot of puzzles like that. I do not like abstract puzzles. I just want to fill the fog of war, fight enemies, and lots of interesting ones. There's a ton of variety of monsters in this game. Even in a single dungeon, there's a wide variety of different monster types with different abilities that you're going to run into. That's what I want. That's what I want. And I want to get loot, and I want to upgrade with loot and cash and XP. I just want the meat and potatoes, baby. Elminage Original. Man, it just gives it to me. All right. Number 7. Wow. Monster Hunter World. This game, it took me a while to really develop a love for it. For a while, I was just so intrigued and trying to figure out how far I can get into this game because I was intimidated based on the way other people would talk about it, that it has all these complex systems, and reviewers would say, if you're new to the game, you'll be okay for a little while, but when you get to this guy, casuals are not going to do well, or you're really going to have to learn to get good at this point in the game. And I don't learn to get good. I just don't. I don't have the reflexes to get good. So I need to stay bad and know that if I just am careful enough, if I plan enough, I can get out of normally get good situations. And that's what I found to be the case with Monster Hunter World. Even though the hunts can be really visceral and intense, and like you've got these massive monsters, and you don't really know, especially when you're fighting them for the first few times, exactly what they're going to do next. I mean, still to this day, I've fought monsters, like dozens of times, and I still can't say exactly what they're going to do next. You just pick up some patterns here and there. But oh my gosh, I in the moment I get so flustered and I panic and I just start hammering and mashing buttons. I'm not good under pressure in that way. But what I discovered is if I'm patient, if I grind some of the easier fights, if I really get the components that I need to get the build that I really want that's going to play to my strengths and my weaknesses as a player and compensate for those things, then I can go into the next fight and get battered around by the monster. I can whiff while I'm swinging my weapon and just really play poorly, but do my best, and I can get through those fights. I can get through every one of those hunts. I never failed out. I soloed all of Monster Hunter World, which is certainly a more difficult way to play compared to a full party. There's some nuance with different party sizes in between. But going solo can be a lot more difficult than having a full party every time of great players, that are helping you get through. But because I was patient and took my time gathering took my time preparing and building my loadout, almost like a Magic the Gathering deck. You're figuring out, okay, I can slot in this many things, but not too many of these things. I have to figure out what do they allow me, and how can I be as economical as possible with what I'm slotting into my armor, how I'm building my armor, all the things that I want. It's that same kind of mental exercise of like strategically building your deck in Magic. And then it's a different skill set to go out and actually execute in playing against a different player. And so there's a similar thing going on here where my tendencies toward worry, which are really unhealthy, were turned into a strength here. It's like, okay, let me try to factor in, account for every situation. And I felt rewarded by that. I felt rewarded by all my planning and thinking and worrying. So, and I've put over 1,000 hours in that game. Out as many as 1,400 now, which is still small compared to truly hardcore players of Monster Hunter. But man, I'd never put until before one of these other games even 100 hours into a game, and so Monster Hunter World is by far the single game I have put the most time into. And it started out being a game I wasn't sure if I was going to like. I wasn't sure if I was going to go the distance in, but so rewarding. And even though I wouldn't classify it as a role-playing game like some people do, I do sometimes feel like I'm role-playing as a hunter. Because in between these big hunts that I go on trips for, as it were, I'm looking online and looking up different builds and different monsters and finding out what components they yield. I'm doing my research. I'm preparing to go out on that hunt when it's hunting season, right? So I felt like a hunter. Man, nothing like this game before. And such a dense, rich world when you're exploring these big open environments. I could go on and on and on as I have in the past, so I'll just leave it there for now. But Monster Hunter World, maybe on this list, was the single biggest crater. It might be like in crater impact size, my number one if I was trying to make a list in that order. Wow. Took me by surprise and transformed my gaming hobby. All right, number 9 is Elix. This game I did not like at first, and it took me a while to get around to liking it. I had to really change my expectations about what this game is and what I should expect. Once I understood that the game is designed to take you from zero to hero, and be the type of game where at first you're not even supposed to engage in combat. I don't know if that's actually the intent of the devs, but a number of people in forums and stuff online would say something along those lines, and that makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of the missions, you are going from A to B in the world, but you don't have to fight. You get XP from taking A to B, although the quests are not boring. The characters you're interacting with are just, I mean, the story, the core story is not super riveting, but the world is so engaging to explore and figure out what happened here. And the personalities of the different characters that you run into, despite the very wooden facial animations, the personalities are so interesting and just unconventional. And yeah, and once I realized, okay, the game here is to start as zero and make my way to hero, then it started giving me some of those Monster Hunter vibes where I'm like, okay, well, if I'm just careful, if I'm cautious, if I really think and plan and worry and try to plan for contingencies, then I can make my way through this game. And like Monster Hunter, I was being rewarded for that kind of play style. Not for figuring out how to get good with my controller and dodge at the right time, even though there's a stamina system. It was giving me Souls vibes early on. I was like, oh, this game's not for me. It's clearly trying to be like a Souls game. But I don't think it is. I think that's only a surface level comparison can be made in that regard. It is a rich, very open world RPG, third person, but in some ways a lot like a Bethesda game, except unlike those Bethesda RPGs, if you go off the beaten trail even a little bit, you're going to get smashed down, you know. So Elix took me a while to figure out, but to just won me over with its strange mash of post-apocalyptic sci-fi with some space sci-fi, but also some sword and sorcery fantasy all over the place and mutated monsters. And I mean, the world here is one of the most, it reminds me of foggy memories of Thundar the Barbarian. If you want more Thundar the Barbarian or a Thundar the Barbarian video game, you just want to be in that world, man, Elix is definitely worth checking out. It's so sad that Piranha Bytes has gone under now. I know they're looking for, I think, a new publisher, but I'm assuming they've lost hold of the IP, and they made Elix 2, which was definitely unresolved. It resolved the main story of that game, and so I think it's still worth playing, but it's so sad to me they're not going to be able to finish out that trilogy, it would seem. Man, but Elix, what an experience. The second one, fantastic as well, but Elix was the one that really, boom, once I locked into what this game was and how to appreciate it, left a real impact crater in my gaming. And then finally, the most recent on this list, Monster Hunter Rise. Like Monster Hunter World, it took a while for me to really love it because there was those rampage missions that are kind of like tower defense missions, and I'm like, there weren't a ton of those, but just knowing that every once in a while I was going to have to do one, it's like, I was taking some of the joy out of it. There also wasn't the same mechanical depth and complexity of the early campaign as there was in Monster Hunter World, and even when you get to the post-game, there's still not quite the same density of mechanisms going on in the game to really give me that simulated hunter vibe in the way that World did. But part of the trade-off is that the combat is a lot more responsive. The animations are, I think, just a little bit more quick, and you can dodge certainly a lot more easily. The hunts are just, well, I don't know how much of it is me getting more familiar with this type of game and how much of it is the game itself, but it definitely felt easier than Monster Hunter World, more approachable in many ways. It lets me pause, which Monster Hunter World is just built as though it assumes people are only going to play with other people online, so there's no pause capability. Well, finally, in Monster Hunter Rise, if you're playing single player, you can pause, baby. Thank you very much, Capcom, because I got a life going on that I got to pause for now and then. So, yeah, I'm 400, 500 hours now into Monster Hunter Rise, which is still probably more total than I've put into Skyrim. Well, I don't know, maybe not. But more than most any other game I've ever played in my life. I'm just enjoying it so much, and the monsters themselves. I love horror movies and monster movies, and so in these games, discovering a new monster, figuring out what its moves are, how powerful it is, what it's weak to. It's a similar kind of like structure to a horror movie where the heroes are slowly figuring out the monster, and then eventually they learn enough about it that they can take it on, you know? And so that feeling with Monster Hunter Rise, even though a number of the monsters I was familiar with from World, there were still enough new monsters and some new things about returning monsters that kept it unpredictable, that just gave me a lot of those same huntery vibes. And it's just good fun. It's less intense. And so it's less palm sweaty, like, am I going to get through this? I'm like, I'm probably going to get through this, but I got to be freaking on the ball. And so I really hope that with Monster Hunter Wilds, we get the richness and depth, both visually and mechanically, of Monster Hunter World, but less pushback, more along the lines of Monster Hunter Rise, and certainly with the ability to play with AI companions and offline and pausing, which I really appreciated in Rise. So anyway, yeah, I guess I've probably been talking for way longer than I meant to. I hate this list. It's too short. There's so many games that I wanted to put on this list. I would love to hear what yours are. What are the games that really had a big impact crater in your gaming life? Leave those in the comments below. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Hey! I almost forgot that right now I'd like to take some time to write a tune for pre-made rhyme. The lyrics kind of never change, but the melody gets rearranged. Never know what I'll create to say how much I appreciate Dan Excel, Gabriel Stinson, Olin D. Branham, Winston Crutchfield Libre, Justin D. Myers, Joel Nelson, and Scroffosaurus. Thank you for supporting me, and SBP and CGC, and now to all who hear this tune, thank you as well. Please come back soon. Want to hear your name in song? Check out our page on Patreon. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.